My name is Joed Morris. That's Joeedd, and there's a long story to that I won't tell today. I was born in New Albany, Mississippi, November the 9th, 1942. My parents were William Edward Morris, who was a jeweler here in New Albany, and my mother, Joan Ferguson Morris, who helped him create that business, which really became quite a showcase, tri-county, a tri-state showcase. People came from all over to see the items, the various things that they sold and had for on view. I, when I was 8 years old, I have a brother, David um, Morris. He's a psychologist. I'm a psychologist, by the way. We joke about both of us becoming psychologists in order to survive our interesting family life. Uh, but he lives in another part of the country. If I had to go back to where I began interested in creative, uh, a creative spirit, it would probably be when I was 8 years old. My parents gave me an Eggermeyer Bible storybook and a telescope, and the heavens never became the same. And that's when I became interested in spiritual aspects of our world, as well as in the universe and the stars and the heavens. But I didn't begin writing. By the way, I was born in New Albany, as I told you, but I grew up right up the street on Cleveland Street, and William Faulkner was born on this street. And you would think with that kind of a heritage that I would have picked up on and began writing early in life, but I didn't. I didn't begin writing until I was a student at Delta State. And the Delta is just a different world. Uh, it beckons, it entices, it expands the mind. Uh, and I wrote my first poem sitting in the library at Delta State. And I don't know, it was fall, and the weather was nice. Wind was blowing in, a warm wind was blowing in through the windows of the library. And so I wrote this poem. I didn't think much about it. It was a sonnet because we'd been studying sonnets. And I had a good English teacher at Delta State who played a role in my development, but there were two other English teachers I left out. One was uh, here in New Albany in the ninth grade. I'm trying to think of her name. Oh my gosh. Stevens, Ernestine Stevens. And the other English teacher was Francis Sheffield from Itawamba County. And they were a tremendous help in teaching me how to write and how to structure sentences and to get it right. But then at Delta State, a lady named Myra Butler was my English teacher, and she taught me Shakespeare and some other great writers, and I got really interested in them. But back to my little sonnet, I didn't want to take it to the English department and show them because I feel it'd get chewed up and spit out. So I gave it to Malcolm Norwood, who was a famous artist, teacher in residence at Delta State. And his office was across the quadrangle. I took it over to him one day and gave it to him, and he looked at it, and he thought a minute, and he said, "Can I have this?" And I said, "Sure, you can have it. You can bleep that out, I guess." I said, "Sure, you can have that." He said, "Well, I want to keep it for a while." So a while was a year. And I'm walking across the quadrangle, and Malcolm, no, I didn't call him Malcolm, it was Mr. Norwood. He waited and he said, "Joey, come to my office." And that always sent chills to me when somebody says, "Come to my office," because I was going to the office a lot in high school. I would get into trouble from time to time. And I went into his office, and there was a magazine on his desk that was splayed out, face down. And he flipped it over, and he pointed up into the corner, but before he pointed, I saw it. I saw my poem by Joed Morris. It was the Delta Review. I get emotional telling this story because that's when the fire probably fell. When I felt, I can do something with this. So I tried writing poetry for a while. It was all pretty bad. I didn't really get into writing until um, I was a chaplain above the Arctic Circle for a year. And this was 1972, 73. And I traveled the line. There were radar sites every 100 miles on the DEW line put into place by the Eisenhower administration to protect us from the Russians coming over the polar cap and attacking us. And there were radar sites every 100 miles, and my job was to monitor the morale of the men on the line and to hold worship services, offer communion, things like that. There were 4 chaplains. RCA had the contract, and they required 4 chaplains at all time, and my boss was a man named Paul Maurer, a name that you probably don't know about, but he was General Patton's chaplain, and he was my boss for a full year. And traveling the line place to place, I had a room, and there was not much to do above the Arctic Circle, and I started writing. And I started writing about growing up in New Albany. I started writing autobiographical things. And when I left the Arctic Circle, I quit writing for a while. I don't know, I was just doing other things. I was trying to survive, actually, and trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I went ahead and got my PhD in psychology over at Ole Miss. And then in 1960-61, I met a person who liked what I had written, and she became an inspiration for me to keep writing and to finish some of the things I had started. Her name is Sandy. We married, and she was always encouraging, and she's a former English teacher too, so she edited almost everything that I wrote. I say that because I've been fortunate to have about 16 books published, half of them nonfiction, half of them fiction. She's edited every one of them, and I tell people if you find an error in any of these books, it's a publisher's error. It's not Sandy's error. So that gives you a little background on my writing and how it started out. But I want to tell the story about the first novel that I wrote. The title of it is The Weaning Hill. It's been sitting on the shelf for a long time, over almost 30 years. It was too quiet for any publishers to be interested in. So I started on another novel. I went back to the things I had been writing above the Arctic Circle about my life and growing up in New Albany. And I met a lady named Frances Patterson in Tupelo, Mississippi, who was head of their English department at the high school there. And she said, "You've got to meet someone. There's someone I want you to meet, Evans Harrington." I said, "Who's Evans Harrington?" She said, "He's the head of the English department at Ole Miss." Well, I met Evans. We met on the balcony there at Square Books. The balcony is no longer there. And I gave him my first novel. He took it home, called me. We met 2 weeks later, same place, on the balcony overlooking the courthouse, where Faulkner used to sit and look at the courthouse. And he said, "Joe Ed, this is a novel that you, how did he put it? This is a good, this is a start for a first novel." Something of that effect. In other words, he was not overly impressed with it. And he said, "I want you to go back and work on it some more." So I took it, and for months and months I worked on it. And we met again, same place. But I gave him 2 manuscripts this time. I gave him the manuscript that I revised, and I gave him the manuscript of all the outtakes. So he took those. We met again later, but we met at Memphis at the Peabody. It was his idea, and our wives joined us. And he said, well, I liked what you've written, but he said, I liked some of the stuff you took out better than some of the stuff you left in. So I wasn't sure how to take that, but I saved it because you don't throw away anything. Faulkner never threw anything away. He always saved it because you never knew when it might come in handy. So I'm telling you all of this to tell you that that book became Torched, summer of '64, which was published 3 years ago. But in that time, I was writing a book about Mexico and a travel journey, a travelography of sorts. And it came from Evans Harrington. He dropped the seed for this. He and his wife Betty were sitting on our pool house porch, a guest house porch, one evening, and we were talking about various things. And he told me the story of a young man who went to Brazil in search of his Confederado kin, ancestors. The Confederados were the Confederates that when Lee surrendered at Appomattox, General J.O. Shelby of Missouri, who was the general of the Western forces, took an entire army of Confederate soldiers down into Mexico to start another South. This is another long and interesting story. But he's telling this, and he said this young man wanted to find his long lost relatives, his Confederado kin, he heard were in Brazil. So he did his research, and he went to Brazil. He went to the village where he felt they would be, where they were living, and he went to the house that he had been told where there were some Americans living. And he knocked on the door, and this wizened face appears in the crack of the door and asked who he was in Portuguese. And he told him who he was. And she said, well, y'all come on in. She threw the door open, y'all, and the accent was still there from those days. I took that kernel and from it developed a tetralogy, 4 novels. The first was Land Where My Fathers Died, which is the story of a young man going into Mexico looking for his long lost kin. And then what happens when he finds them, and then his return to the South, which was the Delta, and then what happens when he's in the Delta, and what happens 77 years later in his life. And it was a remarkable journey for me to do that. But in the process, I had this novel that Evans Harrington gave back to me and said, I like the stuff you took out, and I developed it further, and it became Torch, summer of '64. And I'm grateful that it received some awards. And it's partly autobiographical. I am a disciplined writer. I used to get up at 4 every morning and write, and I did that for maybe 20 years or so. I don't get up at 4 every morning, but I get up in the morning. Sometimes it's 2 o'clock, sometimes it's 3. If I can't sleep, I'm not going to fight it. I get up and I write. And I was telling Jill the other day, I don't ever get writer's block because I keep 2 or 3 going at one time. And if I get stalled on one, I will shift to another one. And so I try to write every day. And my advice to young writers, if any of them happen to be watching this presentation, is number 1, never give up. Land Where My Fathers Died was my first published novel. I sent out 50 query letters. 49 came back rejecting it. The last one accepted it, and that launched my writing career. So you don't ever give up. You stay with it, you stick to it, and you don't throw anything away, and you listen. I've got the what I call the 3 L's of writing: listen, look, and log. That's what I was doing that night when I heard Evans telling me that story. I was listening to it, and before they left that night, I logged it. I'd already put it in a notebook where I kept all my notes. So here I am at 82 years young, and I've got 3 books in the mill. One is Where the Road Ends. It's a travelography, an autobiography of sorts. Another one is the very first novel that I wrote, The Weaning Hill, is coming out this July. And then I'm working on a 3rd book on the lost epistle, Paul's missing years. And that may be a good place for me to say that it's a great honor for me to be considered as one of New Albany's creative spirits. And I hope to continue creating. And I hope in the foreseen future to keep creating. Yeah.
The Weaning Hill was really the first. That's the book you started when you were in the Arctic?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I probably started several because I was just writing. I was just freestyle, and I was just, I didn't have any idea of where any of that was going at that time. I just knew I wanted to write. I just felt something inside of me. Also, to keep my sanity, because there wasn't much to do above the Arctic Circle. It was kind of an incarceration of sorts. But the Weaning Hill, I was asked this question not too long ago. As a psychologist, do you ever get your material from your clients, from your counselees? And my response immediately was no, because I feel that's private and that's confidential. I'd be invading and intrusive into their lives and their emotional lives or whatever. So I've never done that except one time. I was a counselor at Timber Hills Mental Health Center in Corinth. It was my first job, my first psychology job. And a man came in and was telling me this story. And I said, "Where are you from?" And he said, "I'm from the Weaning Hill." I said, "Where in God's heaven is the Weaning Hill?" He said, "It's about 15 miles north of here." And he told me the story, that it got the name the Weaning Hill because his parents gave each of their children this hill to live on to get a start. And when they got their start, they had to give it to the next ones coming along, and it became a Weaning Hill. And the cover of it is a mound of a hill with a little house on the top. And you can think of other images that might call to mind. The Weaning Hill. It's a novel about dependency, about unfaithfulness, about faithfulness and loyalties. It's about the heart, the human heart. What was it? I was trying to think of Faulkner's phrase that he used in the speech, in the Nobel Prize speech, the human heart in conflict with itself. And Evans read it, by the way, and he said he told me, he said, "This is one of the best things you've done." And he had read some other stuff that I've already told you about. And so I've been fortunate to have people, other writers, interested in helping me. And as a result of that, anytime I get a phone call and somebody says they want some help in writing something, I gladly and quickly offer it because people help me.
What took this book so long to be published?
The Weaning Hill?
Mm-hmm.
How
many years is it in the making?
It was well, in 1978 was when that guy told me that. Oh, I asked him, I said, "By the way," I said, "confidentiality is in place here, but I'm a writer, I'm a young writer. Can I use the Weaning Hill at some point to write about, because I've got enough story in mind?" He said, "Absolutely." So he gave me permission to use it. I don't want people hearing this to think that I don't honor the confidentiality. But that was in 1978. And I started on it then, and so it's taken that long. But when I started sending it out to agents and publishers, they said it was too quiet. And the publishing business now is toxic. It's really hard to get a start. And my books are not self-published. because I've been fortunate to find publishers that were really interested in them. My mother's memoir was self-published by a small publishing house in Mississippi. But I encourage writers now, if they hit walls and they can't get anywhere, don't be afraid or ashamed to publish your own book. At least get it out there, you know. Then, you know, there are several people, famous writers, that were self-published. And because their books got out there, other people picked up on it and they became famous. Never give up. When I came off the Arctic Circle, I came off with $20 in my pocket, and everything that I had had in a home in Colorado had been taken away. That's all I had was that $20. And my brother was living in Jackson, and he met me at the airplane. And we went to a Goodwill Industries store the next day, and for that $20, I bought me two pairs of slacks, 2 white shirts, some underwear, and socks. And I had $5 left over. And he was a psychologist. And I had a master's degree in theology and had worked on a doctorate in theology, all but dissertation. And so I said, I think I want to try to go into psychology. So he drove me to Ole Miss, and I entered in the counseling psychology department and got my degree. And I was wearing 2 hats. I was a United Methodist minister. I was serving some little churches then, but also going to school at the same time. And my parishioners would come to me with problems that I had no idea what to tell them. And so one thing led to another, and I began to lean more and more to the psychology, and finally got my PhD. And then at some point, after 69 years in the pastorate, I decided that it was time for me to change horses in the middle of the stream. So that it's more to that story. But my father came to New Albany, Mississippi with $5 in his pocket. He was bankrupt from a business in Jackson, Tennessee. He met my mother in Gray's drugstore. He started a watch repair business, and from that, so in a way, my father was my role model in starting over again, only I had $15 more than he had in my billfold.
Where was your parents' jewelry store?
It was on Bankhead, and there was a Bank of New Albany. There was a dry goods store. There was Rogers Drexel drugstore. Then the next building was my parents' jewelry store. Then there was West Grocery, and then there was Gray's drugstore. My father got his first job with that $5 at Gray's drugstore. They let him set up a bench up front, repairing watches, and that bench is in here, in this museum somewhere. I went to Cleveland Street Elementary School, and from there I went over to junior high. Those buildings have been demolished and new buildings have come up, and graduated from high school there. Went to Ole Miss as a freshman, didn't do real well, so I transferred to Delta State, spent 2 years at Delta State. They didn't have a philosophy department. I was a ministerial student. Millsaps had a ministerial program. I transferred to Millsaps, graduated from Millsaps in 1965. I wanted to study abroad, and I wanted to study abroad in a place where they spoke English, and in a place that was part of my heritage, which was Scotland. So I went to the University of Edinburgh for a year, came back to Emory University, Candler School of Theology for 2 years, did a year on a doctoral program, and then received a invitation to serve a church in Colorado Springs for 3 years.
And where in there did you end up being a chaplain?
Right in Colorado Springs, after being a pastor for 3 years, I wasn't sure that's what I wanted to do. I wasn't sure God had called me to do this. So I took a leave of absence, and I served as the manager of Santa's Workshop in Colorado Springs for a year. I got tired of that job, so I went down to the employment agency in Colorado Springs, and they said, "You're too overqualified for what we got to offer." He said, but the guy, I can't remember his name, he said, "Oh, but I'll take your phone number and all that, and I'll call you if something comes up." So about 2 months later, I get this phone call, and he identifies himself. I'm from the employment agency. He said, "I got a good job for you up north." Up north, I'm thinking Greeley, Fort Collins, Boulder, somewhere up there. I said, "Well, where is it?" He said, "It's above the Arctic Circle." So OMS, Operation Maintenance Service, which was serving a subsidiary of RCA, and which was maintaining the Arctic, the DEW line, the Distant Early Warning Line. Their main office was right there in Colorado Springs. So I went, I got the job. And then that was an interesting year of my life.
So you were on a boat, a giant?
Not a boat.
No.
No, I went to Fairbanks, and from Fairbanks I went to Barter Island, which is right on the Canadian-U.S. border above the Arctic Circle. And from Barter Island, I would travel by plane every week if I could, but the weather was unpredictable. There were times I would be in one place for a month because we couldn't get planes in. Matter of fact, we ran out of food in one place. They ran out of everything but vodka. And I didn't drink much vodka because I couldn't stand the taste of it, but we were cutting ice blocks off the sea, off the freshwater lakes, and bringing and melting them just so we could get water. It was an interesting experience. But I traveled all the way across Canada into Greenland, and I hitchhiked with the airplanes because there were the oil industries were doing research up there. Prudhoe Bay was just coming into being at that time. And then the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, if they knew that there was a chaplain there at a site that needed to go to another site, they would fly in and pick me up and take me. It was an interesting. Some of my best short stories come from those experiences. I married in 1977, and we were married for 12 years and have 2 daughters, Meredith and Anna Catherine. And that relationship didn't work out. So we got a divorce, and then I remarried a couple of years later. Sandy, I was telling you about, who had read some of my stuff.
So how long have you been practicing psychology?
Since 1977. That's when I got my PhD, and I was hired by the Timber Hills Mental Health Center, and so then one thing led to another, and I went into private practice. So I can't do the math. It's been 50 years. I've been a psychologist for 50 years, probably.
Are you still practicing?
Yes, I still practice. I'm a semi-retired. I'm doing evaluations only. I don't do therapy anymore. I do maybe one evaluation, 2 or 3 evaluations a week. Mainly it's with Child Protection Services and with veterans that have PTSD. My fees haven't changed in 50 years. I'm here to offer a service. And I also would like to say, and I hope this is not self-serving, I don't mean for it to come across that way, I mean for it to come across as hopefully maybe an example for other writers. I've never made a penny off of my books. The royalties have gone to libraries and to charities. When I was growing up in New Albany, my parents had their jewelry store, and my father, when the people came in to get their watches, or to have them fixed and to get their watches, I would be cleaning the store. One of my jobs was cleaning the store, sweeping it out, and I would see these people, older, some of them just wizened, creeping along with handicaps. I remember one lady, black lady, my dad told her how much it was going to be for the watch, to fix the watch, and it was like $2 or $3. And she's opening that coin purse, and she's pulling out those dollars, and he says, "No charge." And I heard that a lot. And he left me a wonderful legacy.
A lot of lessons learned.
Yep. Yep.
You said at the very beginning of the interview that you and your brother have laughed about or talked about that you both became psychologists because you had an interesting upbringing. Is that something you want to talk about?
I don't mind talking about it, but I would encourage everyone to get the book, the memoir Josie, and read that book, and they will understand, and that will be the answer to that question. Our families were interesting, is putting it euphemistically. When I say our families, I'm talking about the Fergusons and the Lamars. By the way, my great-great-uncle is Lucius Quintus Cincinnatus Lamar, LQC Lamar. He's in JFK's Profiles of Courage. The Lamars were an interesting family, and so were the Fergusons. And that history in and of itself, part of it is included in Josie. But to try to understand who we are and where we came from and where we're going, it'd almost make anybody want to become a psychologist, you know? It's an overrated profession. Well, I've got to take that back. I don't want to say it's an overrated profession. I overrate it sometimes, I'm sure, because there are times that I'm still trying to figure me out. It just never stops, you know?
So the book Josie is about your mom.
It's about my mother, but it's about that whole family. And she was a remarkable person. But her sisters were remarkable people. Her brothers were remarkable people. I mean, that whole Ferguson family history is a saga that would make some of these sagas on the silver screen look like Ned and the First Reader. You know?
Do you have more books up your sleeve about this family?
Well, that's a good question. Probably not this family. I've always got books that I want to write, but I figured it. May I call you Leanne?
Yes.
Leanne, I figured it up the other day. With the books that I've got up my sleeve and that I have already generated pieces on paper, I will be published. I'll be publishing books when I'm 93.
If you stay on your schedule.
If I stay on my schedule. I plan on staying on my schedule. Stephen King wrote perhaps the best book on writing, and it's called On Writing. You could read it in an afternoon. It just swims. It's just smooth. And he says to be a successful writer, stay healthy and stay married. And I would add to that, marry an former English teacher. But when he said stay healthy, I work out 6 days a week at a gym. It's a rigorous 30 to 45-minute workout. I have heart issues. I had open heart surgery in 2004. I had an aortic valve replacement just last year. And I came from a cardiologist this morning. He told me that, we want to get another echo of your heart. We want to see how that valve is doing. So I'm living. I'm writing as though I'm going to get to that 93 and have the books out there.
The Weaning Hill. Is it out yet?
It'll be out July the 10th.
Okay.
Now you can, if you go to my Facebook, and I don't like to promote my books, but if you go there,
I asked.
well, you can go to my publisher and get a 15% discount if you order it now. And I give you how to do that and the code to use and everything on my Facebook page.
Are you excited about this book?
I am excited about it. I'm excited about every book.
But this one's been in the works.
Yeah, what makes this exciting is that how people are going to react to this book. Because I don't pull any punches in the relationships. And I don't pull any punches in the behaviors. I don't do anything obscene, and there's nothing that would offend anyone, I don't think. And then Torched is a different story. Torched was going to be used by Emory University in a Zoom event. And they read, some of the ladies that were involved in it read it and said that they were offended by the language because I used the N-word. And I used it advisedly because that's the word the rednecks and the haters used. And I felt like it had to be real. And there's some people that even really open-minded reading the Torched are offended because of the use of that word was not even allowed in my house. I was punished if that word was used. But when you write, you have to write about the human heart in conflict with itself, as Faulkner talked about, and you have to tell it like it is, even if it hurts and if it's painful. My first short story was called Schooler. Does that name remind you of anything? You got a picture of him here in the museum somewhere.
I know who you're referring to.
Yeah. I wrote about Schooler and the things that happened in our lives and how he so energized some of our sports events and things like that. And I used the N-word one time in there. And the New Albany and a newspaper called me and said, we want to publish your short story if we can take that word out. And I wouldn't let them. And they didn't get published. But I didn't feel like I could take it out. I feel like that's, first of all, it's a form of censorship, which I'm not in favor of. First Amendment, I guess that's First Amendment, whatever. Is it the First Amendment? Anyway, I'm not for censorship, but I'm for decency, and I'm for accuracy, and I'm for telling it like it is in an inoffensive way. And so The Weaning Hill tells about some conflicts that will strike home with a lot of people. So I'm excited to see how that comes out.
Well, I look forward to reading it.
I was reading it again, the final time. After I was reading it again before it became a PDF and before they were going to use it. And I got emotionally affected by it. So if the author who's reading it for the 15th, 100th time is still affected by this, and the same is true about Land Where My Fathers Died. There's still passages in Land Where My Fathers Died that I read, that I tear up, and I weep. The human heart.
Since that book has been kind of you've been holding on to that book for whatever reason for almost 50 years.
Yeah.
Have you made any great changes from the original?
Yes. uh, One of the reasons I've hung on to it is because it was one I was writing when I met Sandy, and it was her favorite book. It was her favorite novel of all of them. But there are some places in there that she suggested, I think you need to take that out. She said, what does that add to the story? It wasn't censorship. It just said, just ask yourself the question, what does that add to the story? There's a line in Stephen King's book on writing that I will never, ever forget, and I don't need to ever, ever forget. He said, when you're writing, kill your darlings, kill your darlings, kill your darlings. And when I do that, it's better. When I killed the darlings, I spent 3 days writing that paragraph. I can't take that out. I take it out, it goes better. So I killed some darlings.
Is the person who you consulted with on the balcony,
Evans Harrington.
is he still with us?
No. Evans died, maybe 10 years ago. He started the Faulkner Conference. He was a civil rights leader. He was told by the chancellor of Ole Miss not to uninvite 2 people he had invited to attend a conference. And Evans sent him a letter and said, if you may have my job. These people are either coming or you can have my job. And the chancellor and the governor backed down. That's just one story. We could be here till the cows come home telling you about what Evans Harrington has done for the University of Mississippi and for writers.
Was he also a writer?
Yes, he wrote, his published book was called The Prisoner. The Prisoners. By the way, the 4th book of my tetralogy is called The Prison. And I was writing it when Evans was still alive. But he wrote to pay the bills. He was a ghostwriter. And he's written novels that have appeared in Cosmopolitan, Women's Day, I don't know, and they are a bit racy. He told me one day, he said, I didn't feel like I could have those books published. I think it might tarnish my energy, but I had to pay the bills. I do not think I would have become a writer, if I hadn't been born in New Albany, Mississippi. And I don't think I would have gone into the ministry if I hadn't been born in New Albany, Mississippi. And I don't think I would be as healthy and doing as well as I'm doing now if I hadn't been born in New Albany, Mississippi. New Albany, Mississippi, I once told my friends in seminary, is the capital of the universe.